Hey, I got a confession. Been losing all momentum.
It is Graham here, living the dream in 2020, and another gorgeous July day here in central Scotland. Nah, I know I'm lying. It is pissing it down. It's been pissing it down for the last couple of days. That is absolutely typical for this part of the world in July. So in this video, I'm going to take you on a road trip from my home here in Liv'n, or should I say Fiona's in my home here in Liv'n, to my old home, the home that I grew up in, back in Belfast in Northern Ireland. I've done this journey hundreds of times before, but I've never taken you on this particular road trip here on YouTube. Enjoy. Right, let's set some context here. This is certainly not the biggest road trip we've ever done. It's literally only 129 miles door to door from our house here in Liv'n to my mother's house in Newtonabbey, which is in the outskirts of Belfast. The first part of the road trip is 77 miles from here in Liv'n to the P&O Irish Sea ferry port in Cairnryan on the South Ayrshire coast. It is then 36 miles and 2 hours crossing the Irish Sea to Larne on the County Antrim coast of Northern Ireland. And finally, only 16 miles and 22 minutes, according to Google, from the Larne ferry port to my mother's house in Newtonabbey. Remember that it is July 2020 and we're still in the middle of the coronavirus global pandemic. Here in Scotland, mask wearing is compulsory in all shops and on all public transport. I have been on the P&O Irish Sea Ferries website today trying to understand what the policy is there, because we have heard rumours that mask wearing is compulsory for the duration of the journey, and in this case 2 hours in either direction. Last week Fiona decided to get the sewing machine out and make her own mask, but as for me, I've done what I've always do and I've ordered mine on Amazon. So let's jump forward to Monday lunchtime and let this road trip to Ireland begin. As you can see, it's Monday morning and the weather in central Scotland is as you would expect. It's been raining since the wee small hours and it's looking pretty miserable. And despite being holiday, my phone just keeps going. What can I expect? Next, let's get the journey underway. I've just broken the news to Fiona that she's driving so that I can do some filming on this little road trip. As we approached Liv'n Castle, it was time to turn westbound on the A71 towards the Ayrshire coast. Before I get too far into this road trip, I want to be clear that the weather was pretty miserable for the entire journey, and the views are sadly not what they should be in this beautiful part of Scotland. So if you want to see some much nicer views from the car on the A71 westbound towards the Ayrshire coast, look back at video number 93, recorded in July 2019 when Fiona and I went to Troon to visit Beverly and Gaynor on their sailing boat Salty Lass.
But I do alright if you take me above the cloud line.
As we left the A71 to turn onto the M74 heading southbound towards Ayr and Prestwick Airport, we did think or kept thinking that we saw blue sky ahead. But sadly, that wasn't to come on this road trip, as the rain just kept falling. And as we passed the end of the runway at Prestwick Airport, there wasn't even a Ryanair 737 in sight. As we approached the South Ayrshire town of Maybole, Fiona was asking why are they building a bypass. 5 minutes later, driving through the centre of Maybole, Fiona soon realised that the traffic was pretty chaotic, trying to squeeze through the small village streets. And here we are, approaching the coastal town of Turnberry, made famous of course by the Turnberry Golf Resort, which was just off to our right. For the rest of the journey, down the coast towards Girvan, then Ballantrae, and of course the Irish Sea ferry ports of Cairnryan, you're going to see this rock about 7 to 10 miles off the coast of Scotland. That is called the Ailsa Craig, or what is affectionately known as Paddy's Milestone. For Fiona and I, Paddy's Milestone has quite a lot more significance in our lives. As we sat one evening in our Deerfield Beach apartment in Florida back in September 2000 with a book, deciding what to call our child, who was due to be born the following March in 2001. With me being from Ireland and of course Fiona from Scotland, we took the decision that if our child was born a girl, we would call her Ailsa, and if she was born a boy, we would call him Craig. And in the early hours of the 31st of March 2001, Fiona gave birth to a baby boy, and that is why he's called Craig. Craig, of course, turned 18 in March 2019. So if you want to see a little bit more video on Craig and his 18 years, look back at video number 73, Craig 18 years in the making. I've driven this A77 route between Glasgow and the Irish Sea ferries for decades now, and on every journey there's been some sort of roadworks, and here you can see the road has simply disappeared down the mountainside. I wonder would it have something to do with the felling of hundreds of trees somewhere between 8 and 10 years ago. Whatever the reason, the repair job looked pretty significant and also left a traffic jam on the other side that Fiona and I would have to be cognizant of on a return journey on Friday. On your right, you will see the first of the 2 Irish Sea ferries making the multiple trips every day between Scotland and Northern Ireland. This ferry is the Stena Line, making its journey between Cairnryan and Belfast, leaving Fiona and I with just another 3 miles to the P&O ferry port in Cairnryan itself. And finally, after 77 miles and nearly 2 hours, we arrived at the P&O ferry terminal at Cairnryan. And as we approached the check-in kiosk, this is where we got our first sight of what COVID-19 would be doing to this particular journey from Cairnryan across to Larne. Additional barriers between the car and the check-in kiosk, leaving Fiona with some issues stretching to pick up the boarding pass. I didn't film the check-in process or the trip through the security, but we went straight to the terminal for a quick rest stop before heading back to the car and the boarding process for the 2-hour sailing across to Larne on the County Antrim coast.
heart, the lame, the weak, too afraid to start, the dreams that only came to pass them by. Here's to the broken man who stood and walked when he heard you can't, 'cause it shows me that faith is more than sight.
This was the P&O European Causeway, which is part of two sister ships, making the same journey between Larne and Cairnryan every day, the European Causeway and the European Highlander. The labels you see on the walkway are social distancing markers, keeping you 2 metres apart during this terrible COVID-19 pandemic. P&O's policy was that face coverings were mandatory during the entire 2-hour crossing, and I have to admit that everybody applied by this simple rule. I know it made for an uncomfortable journey, but at the end of the day, what price can you put on safety?
Time to watch, grab a hand and make this day our march. Pulling down the walls we cross, fighting through the wars we lost, looking for the day when we have won.
Despite having to wear the face mask, the 2-hour crossing went actually quite quickly. P&O did a very good job at creating an environment that presented social distancing, or made social distancing really easy. It was soon time to head back to the car deck, get into Big Blue, and make the 16-mile drive to my mother's place in Newtonabbey.
All you need, this whole world doesn't see. Someday we could all be free. We could change the world if we would just believe. 'Cause faith and love is all you need. This whole world doesn't see. Someday we could all be free. Yeah, we could change the world if we would just believe.
Exiting the harbour at Larne, you realise nothing really has changed in decades. However, that's not entirely true, because one of the things that I've noticed after leaving Northern Ireland 23 years ago is the road network has improved massively, and the A8 between Larne and Belfast has improved enormously over the last few years, being turned into a 70 miles per hour dual carriageway, the entire route from Larne to Belfast. As we approach Mossley Millen, the home of Newtonabbey Borough Council, or is it East Antrim Council these days, I've got no idea. However, the sun had come out for our last few miles of this road trip between Strathaven and Newtonabbey. However, as we turned into Woodford, one thing was very obvious: I was back in familiar ground. Right, it's now Tuesday, but you can see that in the caption, and I'm here at my mother's house in Newnabbey, the house that I actually grew up in from the age of 3 years old when we moved up to Northern Ireland from Dublin. The ferry crossing was actually pretty good, given that we're still in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. I think P&O did a really good job, create an environment that promoted social distancing. I'm going to close this video here, and I believe the weather on Friday on a return trip is going to be a lot nicer. Well, that's questionable given how changeable the weather is in this part of the world at this time of the year. But the Ayrshire coast is really gorgeous, as you can see, and on a beautiful sunny day, Scotland and that whole coastline up through the Clyde, there is nothing like it. So maybe we will try and do that journey in the reverse as we head back to Straven on Friday. But until then, I hope you've enjoyed this video. We'll maybe bring you 1 or 2 more videos from the trip here to Northern Ireland over the next couple of weeks. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to keep living the dream.